The rain hit the cobblestones like gunfire. She was not walking. She was not running. She was on her hands and knees at the palace gate, moving forward one trembling inch at a time, her white dress soaked through with rain and blood, her pale hair plastered flat against her face. The guards did not move. They had a protocol for this. Everyone did. The gate stayed sealed after dark. No exceptions. Not for beggars. Not for wounded travelers. Not for anyone who arrived without identification and a blood oath and 3 separate approvals from the royal administration. The gate stayed sealed, and then King Cayden Voss stepped out of the corridor, and the protocol stopped mattering. Hi viewers, if a dying stranger crawled to your door in the middle of the night, would you open it or follow the rules? Drop your answer in the comments right now. He had smelled her before he saw her. That was the part that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Not the sight of her, not the sound the rain made against the stone, but the scent that cut through the storm like a blade through silk. Lavender, rain, and underneath both of those, copper warm and devastating, blood. His body locked up mid-stride. The glass in his hand untouched, forgotten since the council meeting 2 hours ago, cracked straight down the center. He did not notice. He was already moving toward the window, already pressing close to the glass, already searching the torchlit courtyard below with the focused intensity of a man who has just heard his name called in an empty room. He found her. She was 40 feet from the gate, crawling. Her arms shook with each forward press. Her left side, he could see it even from 2 floors up, was dark, with a wound that had been bleeding long enough to soak through her dress and into the rain-soaked fabric below. She lifted her head once, briefly, and the torch at the gate caught her face. Gray eyes, open, awake, aware. She knew exactly where she was. She had aimed herself here deliberately. Cayden Voss set down the cracked glass, turned from the window, took the stairs at a pace that his guards had never seen from him, which meant they scrambled. "My king," his general Reeves started. Cayden walked past him. The courtyard was cold and wet and smelled like iron. His 4 gate guards snapped to attention when they heard his boots on the stone, their faces cycling through confusion to alarm. Sentinel Holt stepped forward, good man, loyal, 6 years at this post, and opened his mouth to recite protocol. Cayden looked at him. Holt closed his mouth. The gate swung open. She heard it. Her head came up. Her arms nearly gave out from the effort of looking up, and when she found his face in the torchlight, something moved through her expression recognition, then relief so violent it looked almost like pain. She said one word, "Please." That was it. One word, barely above a breath, half swallowed by the rain. Cayden Voss crossed the distance in 4 strides, dropped to one knee on the wet stone, and looked at her up close for the first time. The wounds were worse near. The cut at her shoulder was jagged, the kind made in a hurry, or a struggle. The one at her left side was different. Clean entry, deliberate angle, placed exactly where it would cause the most damage over the longest stretch of time. Whoever did this wanted her to suffer slowly. His jaw tightened to the point of pain. "Who did this to you?" His voice came out lower than he intended. She didn't answer. Her arms buckled. He caught her before she hit the stone. Both arms, full hold, pulling her against his chest as her body went slack with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been fighting to stay conscious for hours and has finally reached the place they were trying to reach. She weighed almost nothing. That was the detail that broke something open in him. Not the blood, not the wounds, not even the single word she'd said. The fact that she weighed almost nothing and still had crawled through a storm to get here. He stood. Around him, the courtyard was completely silent. His guards, his general, 2 advisors who had followed him down and now wished they hadn't, all of them watching him hold a bleeding stranger like she was made of something irreplaceable. "Clear the entrance." His voice was calm, absolute, the voice he used when a decision had already been made, and he was simply informing the world of that fact. "Get Merrin. Get the East Healing Chamber open and heated. And if anyone touches her before I set her down myself." He let the silence finish the sentence. Then he turned and carried her inside, out of the rain, through the gate, into the warmth of his palace. Behind him, he heard Reeves begin issuing orders in a tight, controlled voice. He did not look back. He carried her through the corridor with his eyes straight ahead and his arms locked and his mind running a very quiet, very cold calculation behind everything else. 2 wounds. Deliberate placement. She knew his gait. She aimed for it. Someone had hurt her badly enough that she bled through a storm, and she had come here to him, to his gate, to his kingdom, like this was the only place left in the world she thought might not turn her away. The lavender hit him again as he turned the corner toward the east wing. Low, warm, underneath all the blood and rain. He held her closer. She breathes, he thought, with a quiet certainty that felt less like a decision and more like the first law of a new world. She breathes, or every single person responsible for those wounds answers to me. Every one. He did not know her name yet. He did not know where she came from, or what she was running from, or why his gate specifically, or why that scent was doing what it was doing to the part of him he kept locked down and had for years. He only knew that she was in his arms, and that no one was taking her. Maren was waiting at the chamber door, already pulling on her gloves, already reading the situation with the sharp clinical eye that had made her the best healer in 4 kingdoms. She looked at the girl, at the wounds, at Caden's face. She did not waste a single word. Set her here. He set her down with more care than he had ever moved anything in his life. His hands lingered at her shoulders for 1 extra second before he straightened. Maren was already working. The girl still nameless, still pale, her breathing shallow and too slow for his comfort, lay against the white sheets and looked smaller than she had outside. Less like someone who had clawed her way through a storm, more like someone who had simply run out of road. Caden pulled the chair to the side of the bed. Sat. Did not leave. Maren glanced at him once with an expression that was somewhere between professional resignation and personal concern. He looked back at her with an expression that said the chair was not moving. Outside, the rain kept coming. Inside, the fire breathed low and steady. And Caden Voss, who had not feared anything in longer than he could remember. I sat in the firelight and watched a stranger breathe, and tried very hard not to think about what it meant that the only thing in his palace that felt urgent right now was making sure she kept doing it. Her hand was half open on the sheets. He looked at it for a long time. Then Maren said, very quietly, "My king, her fever is rising," and something in Caden's chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Her fever hit 103 before midnight. Maren said it like a fact, and Caden received it like a threat. Jaw tight, shoulders locked, standing at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the girl's face, like he could hold her temperature down through sheer will. He could not. He knew that. He stayed anyway. She had told him her name in one of her brief windows of consciousness. Sarah. Just Sarah. Nothing attached. Delivered in a voice that made it clear she was offering the minimum and watching to see what he did with it. He had taken it without pushing. He would find out the rest later. Right now, the name was enough. A handhold. Maren changed her bandages twice before the 2nd hour. Each time, Caden watched without blinking. The wound at her side was deep, she would carry the scar, but clean enough now that infection was the primary threat. The shoulder wound was shallower but uglier, torn at the edges in a way that confirmed struggle. She had fought back. Of course she had. My king. Maren's voice was patient, which meant she had been working up to this. You have not eaten. You have not slept. The council has sent 3. Tell them morning. It is nearly morning. Tell them later morning. Maren pressed her lips together and did not argue, which was one of the things that made her exceptional. Around the 3rd hour, Sarah's breathing steadied. Not fully, not enough, but the ragged, uneven pull of it eased into something less frightening, and Caden felt the knot behind his sternum loosen by a single degree. He exhaled slowly, rolled his neck, sat back down in the chair he had not left. The fire had burned to coals. He did not call for more wood. He watched her instead. In stillness, she was younger than the wounds suggested. Her face carried no cruelty, only exhaustion, deep and layered, the kind that lives in a person so long it stops feeling like a state and starts feeling like a feature. She had been running for a long time. He didn't know from what yet. He recognized the look regardless. Her hair had dried in the warmth, pale, silver white with faint threads of gold near her temples, and it spread across the pillow in a way that made her look, for one unguarded moment, like someone who had never been hurt at all. Then she shifted. A small sound came from her, not a word, not quite a cry, somewhere between the two. Her hand moved across the sheets, reaching for something that wasn't there, fingers curling inward when they found nothing. Caden went very still. He looked at her hand. Open, searching. He did not take it. He stood instead and moved to the window, putting his back to the bed, jaw locked, staring out at the gray pre-dawn sky like it had personally offended him. He was the Alpha King of Draveth. He had ruled for 9 years, and for 9 years he had been the man who did not need anything he could not calculate. He had made peace with that. He turned around. She had gone still again, hand half open on the sheets, face slack with exhausted sleep. He walked back to the chair, sat down. He was still sitting there when Maren returned at dawn and found him upright, awake, watching the door, and chose, wisely, not to comment. "She will need days of rest," Maren said quietly, pulling on fresh gloves. "Her body has been through significant trauma. The fever is down. The wounds are closing. But she needs stillness and time." Caden nodded. "My king." Maren hesitated. "Do you intend to remain here?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. Maren gathered her instruments and left without further questions, which Caden noted and appreciated. He looked back at Sarah. Her scent had settled now, the blood and rain washed away, lavender beneath everything, faint and consistent, the kind of thing that wasn't trying to get his attention, and got it anyway. His wolf, usually silent and contained, kept rising toward it, with the focused pull of a compass finding north. He kept pushing it back down. It kept returning. He was still arguing with himself about what that meant when the door opened behind him. Reeves, his general, 6'2", 20 years of service, not easily rattled, currently standing in the doorway looking carefully neutral, which meant something had happened. "What?" Caden said. "Lord Alistair of the Southern Reach has arrived at the outer gate," Reeves said. "He is requesting an audience. He says, a brief, careful pause. The girl is his." The room went very quiet. Caden looked at Sarah, at the wound at her shoulder, at her hand, still half open on the sheets. He stood up slowly. "Tell him I'll see him in the throne room," Caden said. 10 minutes. Reeves nodded and left. Caden looked at Sarah for one more moment. She was still sleeping. She did not know someone had just arrived to claim her like property. She did not know what was about to happen in the throne room. She would not be going anywhere. He was certain of that before he even reached the door. What he was not prepared for, what no one in the palace was prepared for, was what Lord Alistair said when the audience actually began. Because the claim he brought was not just a request, it was a legal document, signed before Sarah's birth, and it was valid in 3 kingdoms. Alistair smiled like a man who had never once been told no. He stood in the center of the throne room, tall, pale, expensive coat still dry despite the weather outside, which meant he had traveled covered and comfortable, while Sarah had bled through a storm, and he spread his hands wide with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he came for. "My king." His voice was warm, reasonable. "I understand your concern, truly. But the girl, she has always been fragile. Emotionally, I mean. She runs when she is frightened. It is a pattern. She does not understand that she is cared for." Caden stood in front of his throne. He did not sit. He never sat during confrontations. Standing communicated something chairs never could. "She crawled to my gate," Caden said, "on her hands and knees, in a storm, with 2 deliberate wounds." Alistair's smile stayed exactly in place. "As I said, she dramatizes. The cut at her side was placed to maximize pain over time." Caden's voice was level. "That is not drama. That is engineering." A brief, almost invisible tightening around Alistair's eyes. "My king, I have a legal document. I saw it. Then you understand that she is. You don't get to breathe the same air as her." Silence. Complete, total silence. The kind that happens in a room when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Alistair stood very still. The warm reasonableness in his face did something complicated. Not quite gone, not quite maintained, suspended somewhere in between. His 2 guards shifted their weight almost imperceptibly. Caden turned his back. Fully. Completely. He turned away from Alistair and walked to the window. And in the culture of every alpha court, in every kingdom on the continent, that gesture meant one thing and one thing only. It meant, "You are beneath my response. You do not exist to me. This conversation is already over." He heard Alistair's breathing change from behind him. He heard the moment the man understood. Sentinel Reeves. Caden did not turn around. "My king, Lord Alistair is leaving. He will not return to this palace. He will not write to this palace. He will not send representatives, messengers, or documents. If he is found within 3 miles of these walls after today, treat his presence as a declaration of hostile intent and respond accordingly." A pause. Then Reeves, voice carefully level. "Understood, my king." Alistair's boots moved against the stone floor fast, poorly controlled, all that polished confidence gone ragged at the edges. The doors opened. The doors closed. Caden stayed at the window until the sound faded completely. Then he went back to her room. She was awake. He registered this immediately, the change in the quality of the room, the shift in her breathing, the gray eyes open and tracking him from the moment he stepped through the door. She watched him cross the room and sit in the chair with the careful attention of someone who has learned to measure people quickly. "You were gone," she said, briefly. "Something happened. It's Hanlid." She studied his face with those storm-gray eyes, and he had the distinct impression that she was reading considerably more from his expression than most people manage to. She did not push. She filed it away. "Marin says my fever broke," she said. "It did. She also says you were here all night. She talks too much." The corner of Sarah's mouth moved, almost a smile. Small, real, gone quickly. "I don't know why you opened the gate," she said, not accusatory. Just honest, the way she did everything direct, with no performance behind it. Caden looked at her for a moment. "I don't either," he said. That surprised her. He saw at a brief opening in the careful guard she kept over her expression. She had expected a calculated answer, a political one, something that made sense inside a framework she already understood. He had not given her one because he did not have one. She looked down at her hands. "Marin says I need several days of rest," Sarah said. "You do. I've never—" She stopped, started again. "I don't stay in places. You'll stay in this one." She looked up. "That isn't a question." "No," he said. "It isn't." Something moved across her face. Not quite resistance, not quite relief. The complicated emotion of someone who is not used to being told to stay and isn't sure whether to fight it or surrender to it. She looked at the fire. He looked at her. "What's your full name?" he asked. A long pause. "Sarah Calloway," she said finally, careful, testing the sound of it in the air between them. "Sarah Calloway," he repeated. She nodded once. He filed it away. There was more. He was certain of that, more to the name, more to the origin, more to the reason she had ended up at his gate specifically. He would find it. He was patient when patience was the right tool. He was about to ask another question. Something careful. Something that would not push too hard when Sarah's face changed. Completely. In the space of a single second, all the color dropped out of it. Her hands flew to her ribs. She doubled forward with a sharp, involuntary sound, not a scream, not quite. Something worse. Something that sounded like pain that had arrived without permission and taken over the whole body. Caden was out of the chair before he finished processing what he was seeing. "Sarah. Not mine," she gasped. Her fingers were white-knuckled against her own side. It's not my wound. Someone nearby, someone is—" She broke off. Her body shook. He grabbed her by the shoulders. "Look at me. What is happening to you?" She lifted her eyes to his, and what he saw in them, not just pain, but helplessness, the particular horror of something happening to your body that you have no control over, drove something cold and furious straight through the center of him. "Marin," he said, without looking away from Sarah's face. Sharp, immediate. Marin appeared from the doorway she had been just outside, he realized, close enough to hear. "Explain this," he said. Marin's voice was quiet, careful, like someone delivering information they know will land badly. "There are those born with a blood mender's gift, my king. They absorb the pain of wounds that occur nearby, feel them as their own. It cannot be controlled." "How far is nearby?" "It varies, typically within a quarter mile." Caden looked at Sarah. She was still shaking. Both hands pressed to her ribs. Her breathing came in short, tight pulls. Someone in this palace, he realized. Someone within a quarter mile of this room is wounded right now, and she is feeling every second of it, and there is nothing she can do, and nothing I can do, and— He pulled her forward, both arms, careful with her injuries, firm with everything else. He tucked her head against his chest and pressed one hand flat to the back of her neck. "Breathe," he said. She breathed. Again. She did. Her heartbeat was chaos against his chest, fast, uneven, spiking with each wave of borrowed pain. He felt it slowly begin to steady. The shaking in her shoulders dropped by degrees. He pressed his forehead down against the top of her head and closed his eyes. He was going to find out who was hurt in his palace right now. He was going to make sure it did not happen again. He was going to restructure the entire East Wing, if that was what it took to keep her out of range of every wound that happened within these walls. He was going to do all of that. After she stopped shaking, "It's passing," she said quietly, after a long moment. Her voice was muffled against his chest. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I know it's... Don't apologize, he said. She went quiet. The fire crackled. The room breathed. She was still against him now. The shaking had stopped. Her heartbeat had steadied. Her hands had released their grip on her own ribs. She had not pulled away. He had not let her. He opened his eyes. And across the room, standing in the doorway with his hand on the frame and an expression Caden could not read, was Gideon. Gideon Cole. 6 years at Caden's side. Trusted. Loyal. The man Craig turned to when he needed something done without questions. He had come to check on the king. Simple enough. Natural enough. Caden started to speak. And then Sierra felt it. Her whole body went rigid in his arms. Not pain this time. Not the bloodmender's curse. Something else. Something older. She turned her head slowly. The way you turn when you already know what you're going to see and you're trying to prepare yourself for the seeing of it. She found Gideon in the doorway, and the sound that came out of her was the smallest sound Caden had ever heard from a human being. A breath, caught, broken in half. Her fingers found his sleeve and gripped it hard. Caden felt her grip before he understood what it meant. Her fingers on his sleeve, white-knuckled, desperate, the grip of someone who has spotted a predator and is trying not to move. He looked at her face. Every trace of color gone. Her eyes locked on Gideon with a recognition so visceral. It bypassed every careful layer of control she kept over her expressions. This was not caution. This was terror. Caden stepped in front of her, fully, body between her and the door, shoulders squared, blocking her from Gideon's line of sight. Out, he said. Gideon blinked. He had a good face for neutrality. 6 years of working close to power had built that in him, but something flickered at the word. Something brief and quickly controlled. My king, I only came to... Out, Caden said again. Same tone. Lower. Gideon left. Caden waited until the footsteps faded completely. Then he turned to Sarah. She had pressed herself back against the headboard, both arms wrapped around her own ribs, breathing in the tight, shallow way of someone working very hard to hold themselves together. His scent, she said. Her voice was almost inaudible. Caden crouched in front of her so they were level. Talk to me. I know it. Her eyes found his. I've known it since before I left. I know what that scent means because I was there when... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. She steadied herself with a visible, effortful act of will. He was there the night they came for me. He told them where I would be. The room went completely still. Caden heard every word, filed each one in the cold, precise place in his mind where he stored information that required action. He did not react visibly. He had learned long ago that visible reactions belonged to men who had lost the situation, and he had not lost this one yet. You're certain, he said. I spent 2 hours in a barn hiding under floorboards listening to his voice, she said. I am certain. He held her gaze for a moment, stood. He crossed to the door, without another word, and moved down the corridor at a pace that was not a run but covered the same ground. He found Gideon at the top of the east stairwell standing, composed, looking like a man who was waiting for an explanation rather than someone who owed one. Caden had him by the collar before Gideon finished drawing breath for whatever he planned to say. He didn't raise his voice. He never did, in the moments that mattered. Tell me what you sold, he said, very quietly. Tell me who paid you for it. And understand that what happens next to you, every detail of it depends entirely on how honest you are in the next 60 seconds. Gideon told him. It took less than 60 seconds. The whole thing, the contract with Alistair, the location, the timing, the money, clean, fast. The confession of a man who had calculated that partial honesty was safer than silence, and arrived at the right answer 2 days too late. By the time Gideon finished speaking, Caden was looking at him with an expression that Reeves, who had appeared at the end of the corridor and was wisely staying there, would later describe simply as the look that meant someone's entire future had just changed. Take him to the lower cells, Caden said, still quiet. Full guard, no contact with anyone. I'll deal with this after the girl is stable. 2 guards moved from behind Reeves. Gideon went without resistance. Caden stood in the corridor for a moment after they were gone. The cold in his chest was not anger. Anger was loud and imprecise. This was something quieter, more permanent. The feeling of a door closing on a version of the world he had been operating inside of, and locking. Gideon had been at his side for 6 years, and someone had bought all of it for the price of one girl in a blood-soaked dress. He turned and walked back toward her room. Sarah was still on the bed, still upright, watching the door when he came in. She read his face immediately, he could see it. the way her expression moved through several things in rapid sequence and settled on something carefully controlled. "He confessed," she said. "Not a question." "Yes. What happens to him? That's not your concern right now." Her chin came up slightly. "It is, actually." He looked at her. She held his gaze with that gray steadiness that he was beginning to understand was not stubbornness, it was architecture. The structure she had built to stay upright through things that would have leveled other people. "He's in the cells," Caden said. "He won't leave them until I decide what comes next." She nodded once. Exhaled. He crossed to the chair. Saturday. The fire was lower now. The room had gone quiet in the way it did in the deep part of night, after the palace settled and the corridors emptied and there were no more footsteps, no more voices, just the soft burn of the coal and the sound of the rain still moving against the glass. "You knew someone inside helped them," Caden said. "I suspected," she said. "Someone told them my exact route, my timing, which roads I'd take." She paused. "I thought maybe I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong." He looked at her. "You weren't wrong," he said. "No." Her voice was quiet. "I never am. That's the part that's never made my life easier." He almost said something to that. Stopped himself. Filed it away instead, in the place where he was storing everything about her piece by piece, careful, building a picture of a person who had survived things she shouldn't have had to, and come through them sharp rather than broken. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease. He became aware slowly, then all at once, that she was watching him the same way he watched her, with the same careful inventory, the same quiet calculation. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "What happened to me? Why you opened the gate? Why you're still—" She stopped, started again. "You're a king. I'm no one. I have nothing. I'm a liability with a curse that makes me scream in the middle of the night, and a dead contract with a man who wants me back. Why does any of this matter to you?" Caden was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet," he said. She stared at him. "That's the second time you've said that," she said. "I know. Most kings have answers for everything. Most kings lie about that," he said. Something in her face shifted small, guarded, the particular expression of someone who is not used to honesty from powerful people and does not entirely know what to do with it. She looked at the fire. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Reeves appeared in the doorway, knocked, twice, the way he only did when the news was bad enough to interrupt, and waited. Caden looked at him. "What?" Reeves met his eyes. "The council received formal correspondence this evening, my king. From Alistair. He has invoked the coalition clause." A pause. "He has the support of 3 border kingdoms. They are calling the girl a stolen ward of a noble house and requesting her immediate return backed by combined military force." The room was very quiet. "If we refuse," Reeves continued, carefully, "they are prepared to treat it as an act of war." Caden did not look at Sarah. He did not need to. He could feel her beside him still. Controlled, the careful architecture of her holding under pressure, and he already knew what she was going to say before she said it. He was already deciding that it did not matter. The council room smelled like candle wax and bad options. 9 men around the long table. 9 faces arranged into various configurations of concern, calculation, and careful neutrality. Maps spread across the surface border positions, supply lines. Troop estimates the geometry of a problem that had arrived faster than anyone had prepared for. Caden stood at the head of the table and listened to all of it, without moving. Lord Fennec spoke first and longest because he always did, his voice measured and precise, laying out the strategic reality in the clean language of numbers and projections. 3 border kingdoms, combined force that outweighed Caden's northern units by nearly 40%. Winter supply lines already stretched. An eastern front that was not fully recovered from a conflict 8 months prior. The political reality was worse. The document Alistair had invoked was old, predating Sarah's birth, signed in a different political era, binding in jurisdictions that still honored blood contracts as property law. Legally, in 3 of the 5 relevant kingdoms, Alistair's claim had standing. "The most straightforward resolution," Fennec said, "is compliance. Return the girl. The coalition disbands. The threat dissolves." No one looked at Caden directly when Fennec said it. They all looked at the table. Caden said, "Continue." Fennec continued. The alternative refusal triggered a 3-front conflict with compromised resources in winter conditions. Human cost, significant. Economic cost, severe. Long-term political cost, difficult to calculate, my king. This was Worth, the oldest counselor, the one whose opinion Caden weighted most heavily. I understand there may be personal considerations at play here, but a king's personal considerations cannot outweigh the safety of his people. That is the foundational contract of rule. Caden looked at him. She came to me this morning, Caden said. The table went quiet. Sarah Calloway. He said her name flat, without ornament. She came to me before the council met. She sat in that chair and she told me very calmly, the way she does everything, that if returning her would protect this kingdom and the people inside it, I should do it. He paused. She said she had learned not to cost people more than she was worth. No one moved. She was 12 words in before I told her to stop talking, he said. Worth exhaled slowly through his nose. My king. What she said does not change the calculus of, if saving her makes me a bad king, Caden said, then I'll be the worst king history ever wrote down. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that a decision has already been made and the meeting they thought they were having is a different meeting entirely. Fennec tried. My king, the military cost alone. Prepare defensive formations on the northern and southern borders. Recall the eastern units from their current positions. Send formal correspondence to our allied houses, not demands, invitations, with terms that make cooperation worth their consideration. That will take weeks to coordinate, someone said. Then start tonight, Caden said. He looked around the table, one face at a time. Not aggressive, not theatrical, simply present in the way he was always present. The particular stillness of a man who has already decided and is now simply watching the world catch up. She stays, he said. I don't trade what's mine. He left the room before anyone answered. He walked back to her room. She was sitting in the low firelight with her knees drawn up, her gray eyes somewhere far off, doing the private calculation she always seemed to be running behind whatever she showed on the surface. She found his face when he came in. Well, she said. It's handled, he said. She studied him for a long moment. You kept me. Yes. Her jaw tightened, not anger. Something more complicated. Something that moved through her expression in layers. The way things did with her. Peeling back one at a time, until what was underneath was something raw and honest, and not at all what she probably intended to show. Caden. His name. Plain. No title. Sarah. You're going to war over me. I'm going to war over a principle, he said. You happen to be the principal. She looked at him for a long time. That's the kind of thing someone says, she said quietly, when they're trying to make something sound smaller than it is. He did not answer that. He did not need to. She already knew. He sat in the chair, and they stayed like that, the fire burning between them. The palace reorganizing itself around a decision that would reshape the next several months of both their lives. And Sarah looked at her hands, and Caden looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then she said, very quietly, they'll come fast. If Alistair means it. I know. You should be sleeping. Preparing. Not sitting here. I know, he said again. She looked up. Then why are you? He met her eyes. She held them. Outside, the last of the rain stopped. The night went very still, and in that stillness, in the space between the question she had asked and the answer he had not given, something shifted in the room. Something that had been building since the moment he opened the gate and found her on her hands and knees in the storm. Something that had no clean political name and no place in any calculation he was supposed to be running. She felt it. He could see that she felt it. She looked away first. Gideon, she said. When you talked to him, did he say who else? The question landed differently than she intended. Caden heard it, heard the thing underneath it. The particular concern of someone who has survived one betrayal and is already counting where the next might come from. He named one other. Caden said carefully. She went still. Someone currently inside these walls? She asked. A pausa. Sarah. She looked at him. Yes, he said. Her face did not collapse. It never did. But he watched something move through it, cold, controlled. The recognition of a woman who has learned to treat new danger as data rather than disaster. Who? She said. And Caden looked at her and understood that whoever he named next was going to change something between them. That this answer was not just information. It was a test of a kind neither of them had agreed to take, and the outcome of it would determine something he couldn't yet define. He opened his mouth. The name hit the room like a dropped blade. Reeves. Caden said it once. Flat. No inflection. The way you say something when you are still deciding whether you believe it yourself. Sarah did not move. She sat with her knees drawn up, and her hands very still in her lap, and her gray eyes fixed on his face with the focused intensity of someone running every implication of a single word through their mind at speed. "Your general," she said. "Yes. The one who was standing at the gate when you carried me in." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He watched you bring me inside." "He did. And he said nothing." "He said nothing." She exhaled once controlled, deliberate, and looked at the fire. The muscle in her jaw moved. That was the only visible sign of what was happening underneath. Caden watched her process it. He did not rush her. He had learned in 4 days that Sarah Calloway did not perform her reactions. She had them privately, fully, and presented you with the conclusions. It was one of the most disciplined things he had ever seen in a person, and it unsettled him in ways he had not yet fully worked through. "How did you find out?" she asked. "Gideon named him in the cells this morning, when I pressed him for the full chain." Caden's voice was level. "Reeves was the one who passed your route to Alistair's men 8 days ago. Gideon handled the money. Reeves handled the logistics. So Gideon knew everything. Everything he needed to." She looked back at him. "And Reeves, he was taken into custody an hour ago, while you were sleeping." Her brow moved. "You didn't tell me. You were sleeping," he said. "I handled it." She studied his face. "Are you going to keep doing that? Handling things? Deciding what I need to know and when?" He held her gaze. "Are you going to keep asking questions you already know the answer to?" A beat. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite the smile. Never quite the smile. Always something smaller and more controlled just beneath it. "He was with you for 6 years, she said. "He was. And you trusted him." "I did." She did not say she was sorry. He was grateful for that. He did not want condolences about Reeves. He wanted to dismantle the network that had sold her piece by piece and rebuild every compromised wall from the foundation up. And he wanted to do it fast enough that she never had cause to be afraid inside these walls again. What he said was, "It's over. Both chains are cut." What he meant was considerably more than that, and she heard it. He could tell by the way she looked at him, that gray, measuring look, calibrating the distance between what he said and what he carried. She unfolded her legs, moved to stand. "Sarah, I'm not an invalid," she said, already up, already steadying herself against the bedpost with the stubborn precision of someone who has been horizontal too long and has made a unilateral decision about it. She was pale. Her legs took a moment to remember their job. She held on and waited them out. He stood but did not move toward her. She took 1 step, then another. By the 3rd, she was standing on her own in the middle of the room, barefoot, bandaged, wearing a borrowed shirt, 3 sizes too large, and she looked, Caden thought, more like herself than she had since the gate. Whatever herself meant, he was still mapping that. "I want to walk," she said. "It's the middle of the night. I know what time it is." He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed to the door and held it open. She walked through it without hesitation, and he fell into step beside her close enough that she could reach him if her legs gave out, far enough that she did not feel managed. They moved down the east corridor in silence, torchlight sliding across the stone walls. The palace settled and quiet around them. She walked slowly at first, then steadier. "How many people knew the full plan?" she asked. "That you were coming here specifically?" "Only Reeves and Gideon. And Alistair. And Alistair." She turned a corner, stopped at the window at the end of the corridor. The rain was gone. The sky was clear for the first time in days, black and enormous, stars visible all the way to the horizon. She looked at it for a long moment. "I've been running for 14 months, she said, not dramatic. Just the flat delivery of a fact she had carried so long it had lost its weight. Caden stood beside her. "Before Alistair, there were 2 others, she continued. "People who found out what I was. What the Bloodmender's curse actually meant, not just pain absorption. The other half of it." He went very still. "There is another half," he said. She turned and looked at him. And in her eyes, for the first time since the gate, for the first time since the storm, he saw not just the exhaustion and the guarded, careful control. He saw something older, something that had been living in her for years, locked behind every other layer, waiting for a room quiet enough to surface. Power. Raw. Uncharted. And clearly not something she had ever shown anyone willingly. "What can you do?" he said quietly. She opened her mouth, and then every torch in the corridor went out at once. Complete darkness. Instant. Total. Caden moved one arm in front of Sarah, body turned toward the corridor, every sense snapping to full alert. 3 seconds of silence. Then boots. Fast. Multiple. Coming from the east stairwell. My king. A voice in the dark, one of his night guards. Young. Barely controlled. The south wall. Someone breached the south wall. 4, maybe 6 men, they're already inside the courtyard. Caden's hand found Sarah's wrist in the dark. Go back to your room, he said. Lock it. Do not open it for anyone except me. Caden. Sarah. His voice dropped to something low and absolute. Please. A pause. Go, he said. Her wrist pulled free of his grip. Not resistance. Just movement. She was already turning. Already going. Her footsteps quick and light down the corridor. He turned toward the east stairwell. Toward the sound of boots on stone. Toward whatever Alistair had sent through his walls tonight, while the formal declaration of war was still sitting unsigned on a council table. He moved fast. And behind him, from the direction of her room, he heard her door close. And then faint, wrong, raising every hair on the back of his neck, he heard it open again. He was already turning before the sound finished registering. Back down the corridor. Full speed. The night guards behind him scrambling to keep up and falling short. He hit the door to her room with his shoulder and it swung wide, and the first thing he saw was the open window. The second thing he saw was the man standing between him and Sarah. Not Alistair. Alistair did not do his own work. This was a hired man, broad, armed, the kind of build that came from years of paid violence, and he had Sarah by the arm, her back against the wall, a blade in his free hand angled toward her ribs. Sarah was not screaming. She was very still, chin up, gray eyes moving between the blade and the window, and the door with the rapid, quiet assessment of someone calculating exits. The man looked at Caden. The girl comes with me, he said. You let us leave through the window, and nobody loses anything tonight. Caden looked at the blade against Sarah's ribs. Then he looked at the man's face. You have about 4 seconds, Caden said quietly, to take that blade away from her. The man's grip tightened on Sarah's arm. Back up or she bleeds. She's already been bled. Caden took 1 step forward. By people who planned it better than you. She's still here. They're not. 1 more step. 4 seconds is gone, Caden said. He moved. It was not complicated. It was not elegant. It was the efficient, practiced violence of a man who had trained for 20 years and had stopped needing to think about it, which meant it was very fast and completely decisive. The blade hand went first wrist, redirected, controlled, and then the man's balance, and then the man himself, face down against the stone floor with Caden's knee in his back, and his arm at an angle arms were not designed to reach. He looked up at Sarah. She was pressed against the wall, both hands flat behind her, completely still. Are you hurt? He said. No, she said. Certain? Yes. He looked back down at the man on the floor. 2 of his night guards had reached the doorway finally, and he handed the problem to them with a single look. He crossed to Sarah. He took her by the jaw, careful, 2 fingers, tilting her face toward the torchlight from the corridor, and he checked. Her eyes, her color, the side where the blade had been. She let him, which told him she understood it was not about control, but about the specific, focused need of a person who has just watched something almost happen and cannot move on until they have confirmed it didn't. She was unharmed. He exhaled once. Alistair sent 3 teams, Sarah said. Her voice was steady. Steady in a way that cost something he could see that it cost. That's how he operates. He sends multiples so that if one fails, he still gets what he came for. I know, Caden said. My men are handling the courtyard. And the 3rd team? He looked at her. She held his gaze. You said 4 to 6 on the south wall. That's 1 team. This was another. Where is the 3rd? He did not answer immediately, and she read the pause. The council room, she said. He was already moving. She was right. The 3rd team had gone for the documents specifically. For the legal correspondence Caden had drafted that morning challenging Alistair's blood contract on jurisdictional grounds. A challenge that, if it reached the right courts, would collapse Alistair's entire legal claim within weeks. Without that document, the case reset to Alistair's favor. With it gone, the war became the only option left. They had not made it out. Caden's palace guard had them contained in the south corridor when he arrived, 3 men, bound, the document still on the council table untouched behind a locked inner door. He stood in the corridor and looked at all 3 of them. Then he turned and walked back to Sarah's room. She had not gone back to bed. She was standing at the window, the same window the hired man had come through, looking out at the courtyard below, where his guards were processing the remnants of the first team. Her arms were crossed. Her back was to the door. She heard him come in. "All three?" she said, without turning. "All three." She nodded once. He came to stand beside her at the window. Below, the courtyard torches were back. Someone had restored them. The darkness gone. The stone lit orange and ordinary. His men moved in organized patterns. The crisis, managed. The breach, sealed. From the outside, it looked like control. From inside, standing next to a woman who had been held at knife point in his palace, in the room he had put her in, under the roof he had told her was safe, it felt like something he needed to rebuild from the ground up. "I told you this place was safe," he said. "You believed it when you said it," she said. "That doesn't make it." "Kayden." She turned, looked at him. "Stop." He looked at her. "I have not been safe in 14 months, she said. "Tonight I was almost not safe for about 90 seconds. Those are not the same thing." She held his gaze. "You came back. That's the part that matters." He was quiet. "You came back," she said again, quieter. "Most people don't." He did not know what to say to that. He was not a man who often did not know what to say, which meant the feeling was notable. He looked at her face, at the steadiness in it, at the exhaustion underneath the steadiness, at the 14 months of running that lived in the fine lines around her eyes, and the way she held her shoulders, and the fact that she met danger like Data rather than disaster, because somewhere along the way she had learned that falling apart was not a luxury she was allowed. "The council meets at dawn," he said. "Alistair's breach tonight changes the legal picture. He has escalated past political claim into active aggression. That shifts which courts have jurisdiction and how. In your favor? Significantly." Something moved through her expression, not relief, not yet. Something more tentative. The look of a person who has been told good news enough times to know it always comes with conditions. "And the war?" she said. "Still possible, less certain." He paused. He overplayed tonight. He thought removing the documents and taking you simultaneously would leave me with no legal ground and no leverage. He was wrong on both counts. She studied his face. "You're not telling me something." He held her gaze for a moment. "The challenge document," he said. "To collapse Alistair's contract, I need a co-signatory. A ruling house with standing in the 3 jurisdictions he's claimed. And the only house with standing in all 3 is the Calloway line." Silence. Her face went through several things very quickly. "Calloway," she said. "My name." "Yes." "You think I have standing." "I think," he said carefully, "that I need to know the rest of your name. The part you haven't told me." She looked at the window for a long moment, at the courtyard below, at the ordinary torchlit stone of a palace that had just fought off 3 teams of hired men on her behalf and was still standing. She turned back to him. "If I tell you," she said quietly, "everything changes." "It already has," he said. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she told him, and Kayden Voss, who had stood in front of armies, who had buried his fear so deep it had stopped sending signals years ago, felt the ground shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with the woman standing at the window, who had crawled to his gate with nothing, and turned out to be the one person in the continent who could end this whole thing, if she chose to. She was Seraphine Calloway Vane, the last surviving heir of the Vane bloodline, a house that had been declared extinct 11 years ago when her parents died in a fire that 3 separate inquiries had ruled accidental, and that Sarah had known since the age of 9, was not. Her standing covered every jurisdiction Alistair had claimed, and 3 more besides. She was not no one. She had never been no one. She had spent 14 months making herself look like no one, because the alternative was being exactly what Alistair had bought her contract for. Not a ward, not a ward's ward, but a legal instrument, a signature, a bloodline that, controlled correctly, could shift the ownership of land and title across an entire region without a single battle. Kayden sat across from her and let her tell it at her own pace. She did not perform it. She did not soften it or frame it or build toward a reveal. She said it the way she said everything, clean and direct, and slightly faster than people expected, like she was moving through information she had carried too long and wanted the weight of it distributed before she changed her mind. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "Alistair didn't want you back because of the blood contract," Kayden said. "No, he wanted your signature." on 3 land transfer documents and a title succession order, worth more than most kingdoms generate in a decade. She paused. He's been collecting the pieces for years. I was the last one. Caden looked at her. He thought about the cut at her side. Deliberate angle. Maximum suffering over maximum time. The wound of a man who needed something from her and was willing to break her down until she gave it. He was going to force it, Caden said. He was going to make me grateful to give it, she said. That's different. That's worse. The fire cracked once between them. Caden stood. Moved to the desk in the corner, the one stocked for palace correspondence, and pulled a document from the locked lower drawer. He set it on the surface, uncapped the ink, set the pen beside it. He turned. I need your signature on the jurisdictional challenge, he said. It goes to the High Court at Marin's Crossing by morning rider. Once it's filed, Alistair's legal claim collapses, and the coalition has no formal basis for military action. She looked at the desk, at the document, at him. And then, she said, and then we deal with whatever he does next, separately from the law. She crossed the room, stood at the desk, read the document, all of it, carefully, line by line, the way someone reads something when they know the weight of their name at the bottom of a page. She turned one section back and read it twice. She looked up. This clause, paragraph 7. It lists me as a protected party under your house's jurisdiction. Yes. Permanently. Yes. She looked at him. That's more than a legal challenge. Yes, he said. It is. She held his gaze. He did not explain it further. He did not dress it up, or minimize it, or give her a version of it that was easier to receive. He let it sit exactly as it was, a king, offering his house's permanent protection to a woman who had spent 14 months with no one at her back. And he waited. She looked at the document. She picked up the pen. She signed. He watched her hand move steady. No hesitation. The signature of a woman who had made her decision 3 sentences ago, and was simply completing the action, and something in his chest settled in a way that felt permanent. He took the document, handed it to the night guard at the door with instructions for the morning rider. The guard left. The room was quiet again. Sarah set the pen down and turned around. She leaned back against the desk, arms loose at her sides, looking at him with the expression she got when she was done performing practicality and was simply being present. You knew, she said. When you said you needed my full name, you already had it. I had a theory. How long? Since yesterday. Reeves's records. The route you'd been taking. The stops you'd made. I traced it back. And you didn't tell me. I needed to hear it from you. She considered that for a moment. Why? Because it mattered that you chose to trust me with it, he said. Not that I already knew. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the pre-dawn was moving in the sky at the window, turning from black to dark blue, the first pale suggestion of morning at the eastern edge. They had been awake all night. He noticed it on her face, the low weight of it in her eyes, and he noted it in his own body as a distant, irrelevant fact. You need to sleep, he said. So do you. I have a council meeting at dawn. Then you especially need to sleep. Sarah. Caden. He exhaled through his nose. A few hours. Can you do that? She pushed off the desk, moved toward the bed with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone making a concession they have decided to make, rather than one being extracted from them. She sat, looked at him. You'll be here? She said. He looked at the chair. I'll be here, he said. She lay back, pulled the blanket up. Her eyes closed and her breathing began its descent almost immediately. She was exhausted in the specific way of someone who has been running on will for too long and has finally, in some cellular, fundamental way, decided to stop. He sat in the chair. He watched her breathe. He let himself have one honest moment, private, unguarded, the kind that did not require him to be a king or a strategist or any of the other things that had a claim on him. And in that moment, he acknowledged what had been true since the gate, and what was only becoming more true with each passing hour. He was not going to be able to let her go. Not because of the legal document, not because of her bloodline or her standing or the jurisdictional mathematics of her name, because she was the first person in 9 years who had looked at him and seen past the crown to whatever was behind it, and had not immediately tried to use what they found. She had just looked. He closed his eyes. He opened them when the dawn horns sounded, and when he looked at the bed, it was empty. The window was open, and on the desk, beside the uncapped ink and the pen she had used to sign his document, was a single sentence written in her handwriting on a torn corner of correspondence paper. He crossed the room. Read it. His jaw went tight. He read it again. They have your rider. The document never made it. I'm going to finish this myself. Don't follow me. He followed her. He was through the window and onto the outer ledge before the ink on her note was dry. His guards scrambling behind him, 2 of them, calling his name in the hushed, urgent way of men who know better than to shout, but cannot physically stop themselves. He did not slow down. She had a head start of maybe 20 minutes. The pre-dawn was pale and cold, the courtyard below still quiet, the gate at the south end sitting exactly as it should closed, latched, manned, which meant she had not gone through it. He went around the east wall, found the supply entrance propped open with a stone. He moved through it and into the road beyond the palace, and looked both ways in the growing gray light, and then he stopped, closed his eyes, tilted his head. Lavender, faint, moving south. He went south. He found her at the tree line half a mile from the wall, not running, not hiding, standing very still in the open space, between the palace road and the forest edge, with her arms at her sides and her face turned toward the 3 riders coming fast from the south. Alistair's men. Not the hired kind this time. These were his personal guard, armored, organized, moving with the speed of people who had received a specific instruction and intended to carry it out before daylight made it complicated. Between them and Sarah was nothing. No wall, no gate, no guard, just open ground. Caden was still 200 yards back. He ran. Sarah did not run. She stood. The riders were close enough now that he could see their faces, close enough that he could see the moment they registered her standing there. Alone, apparently helpless, exactly what they had been sent to retrieve. The lead rider reached for the rope at his saddle. Sarah raised both hands. Caden stopped running, not because he chose to, because the air changed. It was not visible. Exactly. Not a light, not a flame, not anything that had a clean name in any language he knew. It was a pressure shift, a drop in temperature followed by a rise in something that had no temperature at all. The fine hairs on his arms stood up. The horses felt it first, all 3 pulling up hard, fighting their riders, ears flat, eyes white-rimmed. Then the lead rider's rope dropped from his hand. Not thrown, not dropped in fear, simply released. The way you release something when your hand stops receiving signals from your brain. The 3 horses turned and ran. Their riders went with them because they had no choice. In 20 seconds, the road was empty. Caden stood in the silence of the pre-dawn and stared at Sarah's back and felt every assumption he had built about the world rearrange themselves into a new configuration. She lowered her hands. Her shoulders dropped the specific drop of someone who has just used something enormous and is now absorbing the cost of it. She staggered 1 step, caught herself. He covered the distance. He reached her the same way he had reached her at the gate, fast, all the way in, no calculation about what it meant, and his hands went to her arms, and he turned her around and looked at her face. She was pale. Her eyes were glassy at the edges. A thin line of blood was tracking from her left nostril. Sarah. His voice came out wrong. Too low, too close to something he did not have a name for. I'm fine, she said. You're bleeding. It's a side effect. It passes. She met his eyes. The document. They took your rider at the North Crossroads. 3 men, intercepted before dawn. I heard them in the corridor when I left, talking through the door. Low. They didn't know I was awake. So you came out here alone. I came out here because I can do something you can't. Her voice was steady despite the pallor. I can stop them without a war. What I just did the horses, that's the other half of the Bloodmender's curse. I don't just absorb pain. I can redirect force. Any force. Living or kinetic. She paused. I can end this without a single one of your men dying. He looked at her. Why didn't you tell me? He said. Because every person who has ever known what I can do has immediately tried to use me for it. Her eyes did not drop. I needed to know you were different first. He was very quiet for a moment. And now? He said. Now I know, she said. He held her gaze. Then he looked past her at the empty road. At the direction Alistair's riders had gone back to their employer, with nothing, without Sarah, without the document, with a story about 3 horses that refused to be controlled, and a woman standing alone in an open field who had not moved an inch. Alistair would hear that story within the hour. He would understand exactly what it meant. He'll come himself, Caden said. Yes, Sarah said. He will. Then we need to be back inside the walls when he does. She nodded. He kept one hand on her arm as they walked back, not gripping, not steering, just present. She allowed it, which he had learned was not a small thing from her. Halfway back to the supply entrance, she said, "The writer. If he was intercepted at the North Crossroads, the document is either destroyed or Alistair has it. If he has it, he knows we filed a challenge, and he knows my name is on it." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then he is not coming for a ward anymore." "No," Caden said. "He's coming for an heir." She absorbed that. "That's worse," she said. "Significantly," he agreed. They reached the entrance. He held it open. She went through. Inside, his guards met them. Caden waved off the questions, the reports, the accumulated urgent business of a palace that had been operating without its king for the last 40 minutes, and walked her back to the East Wing himself. At the door to her room, she stopped, turned. Caden. She looked at his face with that gray, reading look, the one that went past the surface of things to whatever was underneath. "Sarah, when this is over," she said carefully, "when Alistair is finished, and the legal claim is dead, and the coalition has no basis left, what happens to me?" He looked at her, at the exhaustion in her face, and the power underneath it, and the 14 months of running that lived in her bones, and the single night's rest she had given herself inside his walls, like she was still not sure she was allowed to. "Take more. You stay," he said. "That isn't—" "Sarah. Quiet. Absolute. You stay." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, layered, complicated, the kind of thing that happens in a person's face when they have been given something they stopped believing they would ever receive, and their body is trying to process the weight of it. She nodded. Once. She went inside. He stood at the door for a moment after it closed. Then he turned and walked to the council room, because Alistair was coming, and Caden Voss intended to be ready for him. Alistair arrived at noon. He came through the main gate, not over the wall, not through the supply entrance, not with hired men in the dark. He came through the front, in full daylight, with a formal delegation of 12 and a flag of temporary parley that Caden's own law required him to honor. The law of parley meant no violence on palace grounds for the duration of a formal negotiation. Alistair knew that. He came to the throne room with the confidence of a man who had already decided how the meeting would end. He stood across the long room from Caden, and he smiled the same smile he had smiled the first time, warm, practiced, the smile of a man who had never once in his life been told no by someone who had the power to make it stick. "My king," he said. "I'll be direct. The girl is Seraphine Calloway Vane. You know this now, which means you understand that what is on the table is considerably larger than one woman's welfare." "Is it?" Caden said. 3 land transfers, 2 title successions, a consolidation that would stabilize the entire southern corridor for a generation. Alistair spread his hands. "This is not about cruelty. It is about order. She signs 4 documents and everyone benefits, including her, including you, including you. Considerably including me," Alistair agreed, without embarrassment. "I am not pretending otherwise. I am simply saying that the math works out for everyone. Except her," Caden said. Alistair's smile stayed in place. "She would be provided for. She was found at my gate bleeding from 2 deliberate wounds," Caden said, "one of which was designed to hurt her for as long as possible without killing her. I am going to need you to explain to me how that is providing for someone." The first crack appeared in the smile. Small, quickly repaired. "There were overzealous actors in my employ. That was not my instruction." "Gideon Cole," Caden said. "Reeves Hanner, both currently in my cells, both with full written accounts of your instructions. Specific. Dated. Your handwriting on 2 of the relevant orders." Silence. The smile was gone now. Alistair looked at him across the throne room with the expression of a man recalculating very fast. "You cannot use those in court," Alistair said. "Testimony obtained under detention." "I'm not going to court," Caden said. He looked at the door to his right. It opened. Sarah walked in. She was not in a borrowed shirt and borrowed shoes. She was dressed in palace formal. Caden had arranged it that morning, quietly, without announcement, deep blue, her silver white hair pinned back, her posture, the exact posture of a woman who has spent her whole life knowing who she is, and 14 months pretending otherwise. She looked like what she was, the last heir of the Vane bloodline. Alistair stared at her. "The document," Caden said, "was intercepted at the North Crossroads this morning. Your men burned it." He paused. A copy was filed by secondary rider through the Marin's Crossing Eastern office at midnight. It arrived and was formally logged 2 hours ago. Alistair's jaw moved. The challenge is on record, Caden continued, under Seraphine Calloway Vane's own signature, as a surviving heir with full standing, contesting the validity of a pre-birth blood contract signed without the heir's legal capacity to consent, in all 3 jurisdictions, by a court that has already, as of this morning, issued a preliminary injunction, suspending Alistair's claim pending full review. The room was very quiet. Alistair looked at Sarah. She looked back at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The standing was in her posture, and her silence, and the fact that she was here, in this room, looking at the man who had spent a year hunting her, and was now discovering that every legal mechanism he had built was being dismantled in real time by the signature of the very person he had underestimated. The coalition, Alistair said. His voice had thinned. Has been notified of the injunction, Caden said. 2 of the 3 kingdoms have already withdrawn their formal support pending the court's review. The 3rd has not responded, which legally constitutes a stay. Alistair looked between them, at Sarah, at Caden, at the room that had turned into something he had not planned for and could not navigate around. You'll be escorted from palace grounds, Caden said. Your parley flag will be honored to the gate. After that, you are a private citizen with an active court case and no political cover. Alistair stood very still for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to the door. He stopped once. At the threshold, he looked back at Sarah. You chose a king over a legacy, he said. She held his gaze. I chose someone who opened a gate, she said. The legacy followed. Alistair left. The doors closed. The room breathed. Caden looked at Sarah across the empty space of the throne room. She was still holding the posture straight, composed, everything in its place, but he could see the edges of it now, the cost of the last 12 hours in the fine tension around her eyes. He crossed to her. She exhaled when he reached her, a long, slow release, like something that had been braced for a very long time, finally deciding the threat had passed. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin came down. He put one hand at the back of her neck, careful and present, the way he had done in the healing chamber when the borrowed pain had taken her over. She leaned into it, just slightly, just enough. It's over, she said. The legal part, he said. The rest will take time. Courts. Proceedings. He'll fight it. But he can't win. No, Caden said. He can't win. She was quiet for a moment. I want to sleep, she said. Then sleep. In a room that doesn't have an unlocked window. I'll have it locked. And no one in the corridor who's been paid to be there. Already handled. She looked up at him, at his face, close, in the gray noon light of the throne room. You didn't follow my note, she said. You told me not to. You came anyway. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. The gray of her eyes storm water, silver at the edges doing the thing they always did, reading past the surface to whatever was underneath. Why? She said. He looked back at her. You didn't just survive, he said quietly. You chose me. Even when you had a door and a head start and 14 months of practice running. She was still. You chose to stay, he said. So I chose to follow. Something opened in her face, not the almost smile, not the controlled expression, not the careful architecture she wore over everything. Something beneath all of that, real and undefended and, he thought, new, like it had not been out in the air before, like she had kept it somewhere dark and private, and was only now deciding it was safe to let it exist. She did not look away. He did not move back. Outside the throne room windows, the afternoon light came through in long, warm bars across the stone floor, amber and gold, the kind of light that arrives after storms. His palace was standing. His walls were intact. His people were safe. And the man who had feared his own heart for 9 years stood in the middle of his throne room, with his hand at the back of a woman's neck, and understood, in the quiet way of things that have already been decided, that he was not afraid anymore. Not of this. Not of her. Not of whatever came next. He had opened a gate in the middle of a storm for a reason he could not explain. He understood it now. He pressed his forehead down against hers. She closed her eyes. He kept his open. And outside the palace walls, past the courtyard and the road and the tree line, in the wider world that would take months and court hearings and political work to fully settle the storm that had been building for 14 months, finally, completely, ran out of sky. The last heir of the Vane bloodline had found a gate that stayed open. The king who ruled with iron had found the one thing he had not known he was missing. Neither of them said another word. They did not need to. The man who feared love became the king who chose it, and that above every battle, every document, every legal claim and coalition threat and hired blade in the dark was the thing that changed everything. If this story moved you, wrecked you, or made you feel something you were not expecting, drop it in the comments. Tell us the moment that got you. Was it the gate, the note, the throne room? We read every single one. And if you are new here, this channel is built for people who believe that the best stories are the ones that stay with you. Stories about survival, about choosing someone, about what it actually costs to open a door for a stranger in a storm. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications. We release new stories every week, and you do not want to come back to find you missed one. Share this with someone who needs a story tonight. You never know who is sitting somewhere needing exactly this. We will see you in the next one.